The first time they called me the machine, I was elbow deep in the chest cavity of a young sergeant from Texas. It was 3 a.m. in Landstuhl, and the air in the operating theater was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the frantic, controlled energy of a team fighting a losing battle. A roadside bomb had turned his Humvee into a coffin for 2 of his friends, and he was the sole survivor, but just barely. His heart had stopped twice in the medevac chopper. I was the last line of defense. My world had shrunk to the rhythmic beep of the monitors, the feel of warm, slick tissue under my gloves, and the intricate, desperate geography of his injuries. I found a shredded piece of shrapnel nestled against his aorta, a millimeter from a death that would have been instantaneous. I repaired it. I brought him back. As his heart stabilized, a young nurse, her face pale with exhaustion and awe, whispered, "My God, she's a machine." The word hung in the air, and I let it settle on me. It felt like a suit of armor. It felt like survival. For 12 years, I wore that title. Major Clara Evans, MD. The machine of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. I was a master craftsman of broken men and women. I could reassemble a human being from a pile of rubble, could look at the carnage war wrought and see not a person, but a series of complex, solvable problems. A shattered pelvis was an engineering challenge. A traumatic brain injury was a neurological puzzle. I was celebrated for my coolness, my detachment, my ability to function in the heart of a storm where everyone else was drowning in the horror. I was a miracle worker, a savior, a goddamn, unfeeling machine. And the entire time, the very reason I had constructed this iron persona, the ghost that haunted every corridor of my life, was sitting in the darkness of my bedside drawer, folded neatly inside a simple blue envelope, its edges slowly softening with time. It was my brother's suicide letter. For 5 years, 7 months, and 3 days, it remained unopened. It was the one wound I would not, could not, treat. The one patient I abandoned. The lies we tell ourselves are the foundations upon which we build our prisons. I told myself I was serving a higher purpose, that my skill with a scalpel was a patriotic duty. I told myself I was honoring Leo's memory by saving the lives of soldiers, men and women of courage he so admired. He'd been my fragile, beautiful counterpoint. When I announced I was enlisting after my surgical residency, bypassing lucrative private practice offers, his face had lit up with a pride that felt more validating than any degree. "My sister, the army doc," he'd said, pulling me into a hug that was all sharp angles and nervous energy. "You're going to go over there and save all the heroes." He was the poet, the artist, the one who saw the haunting beauty in a crumbling wall and the tragic fragility in a moth beating itself against a light bulb. I was the architect, the engineer, the one who believed anything could be fixed with the right tools and the right plan. He listened to the silence between notes in a song. I only heard the melody. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember the specific, granular details because trauma etches them into you with a diamond-tipped needle. It was a cool, gray German afternoon in October. The rain was a fine, persistent mist that beaded on the windows of my car. I had just come off a 36-hour shift, a relentless wave of casualties from a particularly bad week in Helmand province. My body was a hollowed-out shell, vibrating with a deep, cellular exhaustion. The smell of the hospital, a unique cocktail of antiseptic, iodine, blood, and despair, was a perfume I could never quite wash away. My apartment on the base was a sanctuary of silence and order, every surface clean, every object in its place, a stark contrast to the chaotic mess of life I dealt with every day. The mail was a small, neat stack on the little table by the door, a letter from my mother, a medical journal, a bill, and the blue envelope. My name was written in his familiar, looping script. The C in Clara had a little curl at the top, a flourish he'd perfected in the 3rd grade. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. My breath hitched, and a coldness, sharp and immediate, spread from the center of my chest out to my fingertips. I picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy, as if it weren't paper and ink but condensed grief, a black hole of finality contained in a standard-sized envelope. I could feel the weight of his decision in my palm. Leo had been struggling for years. The darkness that had always been a passenger in his eyes had, in the last year, taken the wheel. Our weekly phone calls had become agonizing exercises in evasion. I'd fill the silence with bright, brittle chatter about my work, about the weather, about anything but the elephant in the room, his deepening depression, the medication that wasn't working, the therapy that felt like talking to a wall. The last time we'd spoken, his voice had been a thin, distant signal from a failing satellite. "You're so strong, Clara," he'd said, and it sounded less like a compliment and more like an indictment. "You never break. You just compartmentalize and move forward." And I, in my profound, clumsy love, had offered him the worst possible advice. "You have to be tough, Leo. You can't let it get to you. You just have to put your head down and push through the pain." As if his suffering was a marathon to be endured, not a cancer that was consuming him from within. I carried the letter to my bedroom, my footsteps echoing in the quiet apartment. I held it over the drawer, my hands that could tie a suture finer than a human hair, were trembling violently. I could not make my fingers perform the simple task of tearing the flap. The courage I possessed in the operating room, facing down fountains of blood and the gray matter of brain tissue, deserted me completely. I was a coward before this single, silent piece of paper. So, I did what I had become a master of. I compartmentalized. I placed the unopened letter in the drawer, right next to my passport and a spare pair of reading glasses. I slid it shut with a soft, definitive click, and I told myself the most beautiful, devastating lie of my life: I would open it when I was ready. When I had the emotional capacity to handle it. When the war, for just one damn moment, stopped screaming for my attention. The war never stops screaming. It is a ravenous, insatiable beast with 1,000 mouths, and it is always hungry. And so, I went back to it. I let my work become my sanctuary, my penance, and my addiction. That drawer became a sacred, forbidden line, a border I would not cross. My existence cleanly bifurcated. By day, I was Major Evans, the machine, a paragon of efficiency, calm, and life-saving precision. By night, I was Clara, a ghost in her own home, haunted by the unread words of her dead brother, a sister who was too much of a coward to face her own failure. My work was my atonement. Every life I saved was a flickering candle I lit in the immense, overwhelming darkness of the one I had let flicker out. Every soldier who walked out of my hospital, I imagined, was a piece of Leo, redeemed. I learned to operate not just on bodies, but on my own soul, performing a slow, deliberate lobotomy on my emotions. The first thing I removed was the tremor of visceral empathy. I stopped hearing the person in the scream, I heard the sound of a compromised airway. I stopped seeing the young woman who loved to paint in the lacerated liver on the table, I saw a fascinating vascular challenge. A traumatic amputation was no longer a father of two, it was a complex surgical procedure involving bone, muscle, and nerve. This emotional triage was the only way to survive. Or so I told myself. It was the only way to keep standing when the tide of broken bodies never ceased. I remember one soldier with a clarity that still aches. Private First Class David Miller. 19 years old. A light dusting of freckles across the bridge of his nose made him look even younger. An IED on a dusty road outside Kandahar had taken both his legs at the knee and turned his torso and arms into a roadmap of angry, blistering burns. He was conscious, shocky, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it was beyond screaming. He wasn't calling for a medic or for God, he was calling for his mother, his voice a raw, broken whisper that seemed to come from a place before language. "Mom, Mama, please." I leaned over him, my face a mask of professional calm, my voice the steady, monotone drone I had perfected. "You're safe, Private. You're at Landstuhl. I'm Dr. Evans. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be okay." But his gaze was turned inward, fixed on some private horror show only he could see. His hand, grimy with dirt and dried blood, shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was ferocious, fueled by a primal, panicked strength. "Don't let me die," he begged, his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, locking onto mine with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. "Please, ma'am. Don't let me die. I don't want to die." In that moment, I didn't see Private Miller. I saw Leo. I saw the same pleading look in his eyes during our last walk in the woods behind our childhood home, the same silent, desperate scream for someone to pull him back from the edge, to make the noise in his head stop. And the machine in me stuttered. A hairline fracture appeared in my carefully constructed armor. A hot, acidic wave of panic and recognition rose from my stomach, burning its way into my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake this boy and tell him I was a fraud, that I couldn't even save my own brother, that my promises were hollow, that I was just a woman standing in a room full of blood and pain, desperately trying to outrun her own reflection in this pool of shared suffering. I wanted to confess everything. But I didn't. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind they drill into you in training for moments exactly like this. I met his terrified, child's gaze and I let the mask solidify, the crack sealing over with an almost audible snap. "I've got you, soldier," I said, my voice as steady and cold as the surgical steel in my hands. "I'm not going to let you go. I promise." The surgery was a masterpiece of modern trauma medicine. A 7-hour marathon of focused intensity. We reattached muscle, sealed leaking arteries, debrided burned tissue, and grafted skin. It was a brutal, beautiful ballet of skill, technology, and sheer human will. When his vitals finally stabilized and he was wheeled out to the ICU, my team was euphoric, the relief in the room palpable. They slapped me on the back, their faces etched with the unique high that comes from snatching a life back from the precipice. "Incredible, Clara. Absolutely incredible. He's alive because of you." I just nodded, stripping off my blood-soaked gloves and gown. Alive. Yes, his heart was beating. His lungs were drawing breath. The machine was keeping his body functioning. But what had I truly saved? The body that would never walk again, that would be a prison of pain and memory? The mind that would forever replay the concussive blast, the smell of burning fuel, the screams of his friends? The soul that had looked into the abyss and called out for the most primal comfort there is? I had won a dramatic, tactical battle, but I had a sickening, certain feeling that the war for David Miller's peace was just beginning, and I had no weapons, no tools, no sutures for that kind of profound, internal injury. I could stitch flesh, but I couldn't stitch a shattered spirit back together. Back in my apartment that night, the silence was a physical weight, pressing in on me from all sides. I could still feel the ghost of his desperate grip on my wrist, the heat of his fear seared into my skin. I poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a heavy tumbler and drank it standing by the window, watching the neat, orderly rows of streetlights on the base. It was so sterile. So quiet. So profoundly controlled. So different from the messy, unpredictable, emotionally chaotic landscape of Leo's life. I thought about that last walk, the leaves of the oak and maple trees in Ohio a brilliant, fiery golden red, crunching under our feet. I had been chattering away, my voice too loud in the quiet woods, filling the silence with my safe, sanitized hospital stories, the ones with happy endings, the triumphs. I told him about a colonel, a real-life, square-jawed hero, whom I'd saved from 3 separate gunshot wounds. "You always focus on the ones who make it, don't you?" Leo had asked, his voice quiet, almost a murmur swallowed by the vastness of the autumn air. "It's the only way to stay sane in my line of work, Leo. You can't dwell on the losses. You drown." "Is that what we are?" He'd stopped and turned to me, his hazel eyes, perfect mirrors of my own, filled with a deep, unsettling sorrow that seemed to have no bottom. "The losses? The ones people shouldn't dwell on? The ones who drown?" "That's not what I meant," I said, flustered and immediately defensive. "I just mean, you have to focus on the fight directly in front of you. You do your job, you do your absolute best, and then you pack it away. You move on to the next one. You have to." He'd offered me a small, broken smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're so good at moving on. At packing things away. I wish I knew how to do that. I think I have the opposite problem. Everything sticks to me. Everything." I had taken it as a compliment back then. I thought he was admiring my resilience, my strength. Now, standing in my silent apartment, the whiskey burning a path to my hollow stomach, I understood he was showing me the gaping, unbridgeable chasm between us. He was telling me he was going under for the last time, and I was standing on the safe, solid riverbank, shouting instructions on how to swim. I finished the glass, the alcohol doing nothing to warm the coldness that had taken root deep inside me. I walked to the bedside drawer. I didn't open it. I just laid my palm flat on the cool, varnished wood, as if I could absorb his words, his pain, his final thoughts through some form of spiritual osmosis. "I'm sorry, Leo," I whispered to the empty, dark room, my voice cracking with a pain I refused to fully acknowledge. "I can't. I'm just not ready. I'm not strong enough for this." The years piled up like sandbags against a rising, internal tide of grief. 2008 bled into 2009, then 2010. The war was a constant, grinding reality, a wheel that kept turning, producing an endless supply of broken human beings. I was promoted. I became a department head, a teacher to wide-eyed new surgeons, a living legend in the small, intense world of military medicine. My life was a study in precision, routine, and masterful avoidance. The predictable rhythm of it was a comfort, the dawn drive to the hospital, the scent of cheap coffee and powerful bleach, the grim satisfaction of a surgery well done, the late-night drive home through the sleeping bags, the 1 or 2 glasses of whiskey, the heavy silence, the obligatory, guilt-laden glance at the drawer. I had built a whole life, a successful, respected life, around the agonizing absence at its very center. I tried, half-heartedly, to have relationships. There was Mark, a kind, stable civil engineer from Brussels I met at a conference, and later, James, a witty, perceptive journalist who had been embedded with the unit I'd treated. They were good men, solid men who saw a strong, accomplished woman and wanted to know her. But they would always, inevitably, run into the invisible, unscalable wall I had built around my heart. I'd bring them home, and my eyes would flick, almost involuntarily, to that drawer. It was a third presence in the room, a ghost at the feast, a silent chaperone on every date. I was physically present, I could make conversation, I could even feign affection, but my heart, my true self, was always in that drawer, kneeling before that unopened letter. I was incapable of true intimacy because I was already bound in a sacred, terrible marriage to my unacknowledged grief. The men would eventually leave, confused and a little hurt, and a secret, shameful part of me would be profoundly relieved. Their departure meant I could return to my true, lonely vigil, to the only relationship that felt real, my pact with silence. My weekly Sunday afternoon calls with my parents were masterpieces of omission, a delicate dance around the crater that had swallowed our family. We talked about the weather in Ohio, the health of their aging golden retriever, the surprising yield of tomatoes in my mother's garden. We talked about my work in the broadest, most sanitized terms: it's busy, we're making a difference, the cases are challenging. We never, ever talked about Leo. His name became a landmine we all carefully, skillfully tiptoed around. The silence in our family was a living, breathing thing, a fourth member who had taken his chair at the dinner table, whose presence was felt in every unspoken word. My mother's voice would get tight and thin, the way it did when she was fighting back a tidal wave of tears. My father would suddenly launch into a long, unnecessarily detailed monologue about the intricacies of his golf swing or the failing transmission in his old sedan. We were all broken, and we were all pretending to be whole for each other, and in doing so, we were breaking each other even more. We were a triangle trying to stand with its central support beam removed, wobbling precariously, pretending not to notice the instability. I thought this was strength. I thought this stoicism, this ability to endure, to compartmentalize, to present a flawless facade to the world, was the highest form of love, to carry the burden silently so others wouldn't have to see its ugly, debilitating weight. I was wrong. I was so terribly, tragically wrong. I wasn't building a fortress, I was building my own coffin, nail by agonizing nail. The cracks began to show in small, insidious ways, like fissures in a dam under immense pressure. I started having lapses in concentration, moments of absence that were terrifying. In the middle of a complex vascular graft, my mind would simply go blank for 3 or 4 terrifying seconds. I'd stare at the intricate, pulsing web of veins and arteries, the clamps and sutures in my hands, and for the life of me, I couldn't remember the next step in a procedure I had performed 100 times. The faint tremor in my hands, once barely noticeable, became more pronounced. I had to clasp them behind my back during patient briefings or hide them in the pockets of my white coat. Sleep became a treacherous country I feared to enter. The dreams started, vivid, suffocating, technicolor nightmares where I would be operating, but the body on the table was always Leo. I'd be trying to stitch up a gaping wound in his chest, but his skin would dissolve under my fingers like wet paper, and no matter how fast I worked, how many sutures I placed, the life would just pour out of him, a relentless, dark, silent tide that would rise up over the table, over the lights, filling the room until I woke up choking, gasping for air, the taste of salt and copper in profound failure on my tongue. My solution, in a breathtaking feat of self-destruction, was to work more. To outrun the fatigue. To stay in the bright, loud, demanding light of the hospital where the ghosts couldn't reach me, where the constant external crisis would drown out the growing internal one. I volunteered for every difficult case, every mass casualty event, every holiday shift. I became a permanent fixture in the OR, my presence as constant as the humming of the lights. My life became a frantic, desperate flight from the silence of my own mind, from the truth waiting for me in that drawer. The turning point, the moment the entire fragile edifice of my denial was finally dynamited, was meant to be the proudest day of my professional life. It was a crisp, formal day in the spring of 2012. I was being awarded the Legion of Merit for my distinguished service, exceptional surgical leadership, and profound impact on countless lives. The ceremony was held in the base auditorium, all polished wood and fluttering flags. The room was filled with colleagues, superiors, and a few reporters. My parents were in the front row, my mother in a new, lavender dress, my father in his best suit, his back ramrod straight, beaming with a pride that felt like a physical weight on my chest. They looked so old, so fragile. When had their hair gotten so white? When had the lines around their eyes become so deep? I stood on the stage in my dress uniform, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against my skin, the rows of ribbons on my chest feeling like a collection of lies. A two-star general, a man with a voice that could command battalions, was giving a speech, his words echoing impressively in the hall. He listed my accomplishments, reducing years of blood and sweat and terror to clean, impressive numbers, hundreds of surgeries, a 98% survival rate for patients who reached my table, thousands of lives touched. He spoke of my unflinching courage under fire and my iron will in the face of overwhelming trauma. He called me a beacon of hope and a testament to American fortitude. And as his words washed over me, all I could hear was Leo's voice, clear and close, as if he were standing just behind my shoulder, his breath on my ear. You always focus on the ones who make it, don't you? The general pinned the heavy, ornate metal to my uniform. It felt like a lead weight, a brand of hypocrisy. The audience erupted in respectful, sustained applause. My parents were on their feet, their faces streaked with tears, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the base newspaper and my mother's scrapbook. I was supposed to feel a surge of pride, of validation, of a mission accomplished. Instead, I felt like the greatest imposter who had ever lived. I was no beacon of hope. I was a black hole, sucking all the light into my own hidden void of grief. I had faced down the physical, visceral horrors of war without blinking, but I had been too terrified, too weak, to face the emotional truth contained in a bedside drawer. I was accepting accolades for my strength while I was spiritually and emotionally crippled by a pain I refused to name, to touch, to acknowledge. I had spent years meticulously, skillfully healing the bodies of strangers while the words of my own brother, his final, desperate cry for understanding, sat unread a few feet from my bed, a monument to my cowardice. The applause was a wave of sound that felt not like celebration, but like a judgment. I looked at my parents' proud, tearful faces and I saw the same hollow, unhealed place in their eyes that I saw in my own reflection every single morning. We were a family of beautiful, broken vases, glued precariously together with silence and denial, pretending not to see the cracks that ran through each of us, smiling for the camera as if we were whole. That night, back in my apartment, the metal felt like a burning brand on my chest. I ripped the uniform off, the pin scratching my skin, and let it fall to the floor in a heap of blue surge and false glory. The silence in my apartment was no longer empty, it was deafening, accusatory, a presence that had been waiting for me, patient and relentless, for nearly 6 years. It was finally time to listen. The running was over. The fuel of avoidance had finally run out. I walked to the bedroom. There was no panic now. No desperate urge for a drink to numb the edges. My heart was beating a slow, solemn drumbeat, a funeral march for the person I had been. My hands were perfectly, eerily still. The time for being a machine was over. I opened the drawer. The blue envelope was there, a pale, faded ghost against the dark wood. I picked it up. It was so light. How could something so light have anchored me to the bottom of the ocean for so long? How could it have dictated the course of my life, my relationships, my very soul? I sat on the edge of my bed, the springs creaking a familiar complaint under my weight. I took a deep, ragged breath, the first truly honest, unguarded breath I felt I had taken in years. I slid my thumb under the flap. The old glue, brittle with time, gave way with a soft, sighing sound, like a secret finally being told. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind he always used for his poems. It was filled with his handwriting, the letters sloping gently to the right. It wasn't long. He was never one for grand, drawn-out speeches. His art was in the concise, the potent image. My dearest Clara. If you're reading this, then I'm finally free of the noise. Please don't be sad. Or, be sad, but don't be angry. Not at yourself. This was never your fault. You have to believe that. You were the best sister anyone could have ever asked for. You've always tried to fix things. Ever since we were kids and I'd come home with a scraped elbow or a broken toy, you'd be there with a bandage and that determined look in your eye, convinced you could make it whole again. You can't fix this, Clara. Some things are just broken in a way that can't be glued back together. The world you live in, the one of scalpels and protocols and clear, logical solutions, it's a good world. It's a world that needs to exist. But it's not my world. My world is all fractured light and screaming static, and I'm so tired of trying to find a signal in the chaos. The volume is turned up too high inside my head, and there's no one who can turn it down. It's like a radio that's permanently tuned to a station that only plays bad news, and I can't find the off switch. I'm proud of you. So incredibly proud. You're out there in the real world, saving the heroes. I watch the news sometimes and I think, my big sister is there. My sister is making a difference. I need you to know that. I need you to know that I see you, and I am in awe of you. Don't ever let anyone tell you that what you do doesn't matter. It matters. You matter. My only regret is that I won't get to see the amazing person you become. You're going to do great things, Clara. You already are. Don't let this stop you. Don't let my choice dim your light. Let it make you burn brighter. Let it make you kinder. Please, for me, stop trying to be so strong all the time. It's okay to break. It's okay to feel this. It's okay to not be okay. Don't be like me. Don't let the silence win. Talk about me. Say my name. Be sad. Be angry. Be messy. Be human. Just please, feel it. All of it. Don't pack this away. Don't you dare pack me away in a drawer. I love you. I've always loved you. You were the best part of my world, the steady hand in my storm. Tell Mom and Dad I love them, too, and that I'm so sorry for the pain I'm causing. I'm just so very, very tired. The static is so loud, and I need it to be quiet now. All my love, always. Your brother. Leo. I read the words. And then I read them again, slower this time, tracing each loop and curve of his handwriting with my finger, as if I could touch him one last time. The first tear fell, a hot, solitary drop that splashed onto the paper, blurring the ink of the word noise. Then another. And then the dam, the one I had built with every surgery, every suppressed emotion, every glass of whiskey, every unspoken word to my parents, finally, catastrophically, burst. A sound wrenched itself from the deepest, most hidden part of me, a raw, guttural, animal cry of pain and loss and guilt that I had been storing up for 5 years, 7 months, and 3 days. I collapsed onto the floor, curling my body around the letter as if it were him, as if I could protect him now, my body racked with sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside out. I cried for his pain. I cried for my blindness. I cried for the years I had wasted in silent, stoic avoidance, pretending I was strong when I was just scared. I cried for the boy who wrote poems about the melancholy beauty of abandoned places and the man who could no longer bear the weight of being present in his own life. I let the grief, the true, unvarnished, messy grief I had been medicating with work and distance and alcohol, finally have its way with me. I let it break me. Completely. Utterly. The machine, finally and mercifully, shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. I didn't go to work the next day. Or the day after that. I called my commanding officer and told him I was unwell. It was the truest, most honest thing I had said in years. I was sick. I was sick with a grief I had refused to diagnose, a festering wound I had ignored until it had poisoned my entire system. I stayed in my apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my emotional life. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check my email. I didn't change out of my pajamas or brush my hair. I just let the waves of sorrow, and anger, and guilt, and a strange, burgeoning sense of release, wash over me. I didn't fight them. I surrendered to the feeling. It was the beginning of my true convalescence, the most important healing of my life. The journey back to myself was the hardest, most complex operation I had ever performed, and the patient was my own soul. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Rosenthal, whose office was off-base and filled with green, growing plants, a stark contrast to the sterile environment I was used to. I talked. I talked for hours about Leo. About his brilliant, fragile mind. About his laugh, which was like sudden sunshine. About his fear of the dark even as a teenager. About the war. About the soldiers I'd saved and the ones I'd lost. About the blue envelope. I learned that grief is not a linear path with a clear finish line, but a spiral staircase. You keep circling back to the same pain, but each time, you're viewing it from a slightly higher, different perspective. I learned that strength isn't the absence of falling apart, it's the courage to gather the pieces and build something new, something different, even if it has cracks, even if it's not as perfect as the original. The cracks are where the light gets in. I took an extended leave of absence. I went home to Ohio. I sat with my parents at the familiar, scarred kitchen table, the formica top worn from decades of family meals and homework, and I showed them the letter. We held hands, our knuckles white, and we took turns reading it aloud, our voices breaking over his words. We cried until there were no tears left, until we were just hollowed out and holding on to each other. We talked about him. We said his name out loud, without flinching. Leo. We told stories we hadn't dared to mention in years, stories that had been trapped in the amber of our shared silence. The time he tried to bake a cake for my 16th birthday and used salt instead of sugar. The beautiful, heartbreaking sonnet he wrote for our mother when she was sick with pneumonia. The way he could name every constellation in the winter sky and tell you the myth behind it. We let his memory back into the room, and it was agonizing, but it was no longer forbidden. It was a relief, like lancing a wound. It was a start. We began, tentatively and together, hand in wobbly hand, to heal the silence that had broken us. When I returned to Landstuhl, I was a different surgeon. A different person. The skill was still there, the knowledge, the muscle memory, the steady hands. But the machine was gone. In its place was a woman. I allowed myself to feel the profound, human weight of my work. I sat with families in the quiet rooms and cried with them when we lost a patient, my tears mingling with theirs. I celebrated with soldiers taking their first, wobbly steps on new prosthetic legs with a joy that was real and unguarded and messy. I started a program for the medical staff, a mandatory, regular debriefing and peer support group, because I finally understood the profound, simple truth that had eluded me for so long: you cannot stop another person's bleeding if you are hemorrhaging yourself. You have to tend to your own wounds first. You have to acknowledge your own pain before you can have any hope of alleviating another's. I never forgot the core of Leo's message. Don't let the silence win. I left the army a year later. It was a conscious, peaceful choice, not a retreat. I had served my purpose there. I came back to the United States and now I run the trauma unit at a large veterans hospital in Virginia. But my work is broader, deeper now. I teach, I lecture, I advocate. I speak at medical conferences and to community groups about the invisible wounds of war, the trauma that families carry, the devastating cost of untreated grief and the stigma around mental health. I tell them about my brother. I tell them our story. I tell them about the brilliant, sensitive boy who was lost to the static in his own mind, and the sister who was so busy being strong and fixing things that she forgot how to be human, how to be vulnerable, and how, in the end, his words, the ones she was too afraid to read, were the only thing that could ultimately save her. The blue envelope is no longer hidden away in darkness. I had it framed in a simple, dark wood frame. It hangs on the wall in my home office, right between my medical degree from Johns Hopkins and my Legion of Merit citation. It is not a trophy of my pain. It is my most sacred credential. It is a reminder, every single day, to feel, to connect, to be vulnerable, to acknowledge the brokenness in myself and in others, and to understand that some things can't be fixed, only carried. It is the most important lesson I ever learned, written in the hand of the person I loved most in this world. They used to call me the machine. A title of respect, born from awe and a little fear, a testament to a skill that was both a gift and a curse. Now, they call me Dr. Evans. A title of profession, earned through years of study and practice and dedication. But the name I cherish most, the one that holds the most truth, the most love, and the most hard-won peace, is the one he used at the top of his last letter to me. Sister. I spent 12 years healing soldiers' bodies, mending the visible, brutal wounds of war with steel and suture and sheer force of will. And in the end, it was my brother's unopened letter, the one that sat in a drawer as a monument to my own fear and a testament to his pain, that finally taught me how to heal the invisible wounds, the ones that fester in silence, the ones that no scan can detect and no medicine can cure. It taught me how to heal a soul. My own. And the lesson I carry with me now, the one I impart to every broken heart, every grieving family, every soldier struggling with the war they brought home inside them, the moral of my story, is this: the bravest thing you will ever do is not to never fall apart, it is to have the courage to finally, and completely, break, and then to decide, piece by painful piece, to build yourself back up again, not into what you were, but into something new, something softer, something real.